The Indians are coming, boundary disputes and Granny's call to arms. I have always felt a particular quickening of the pulse when the story turns from the quiet aftermath of the returned fortune to the sudden alarm of the Indian crisis. The transition is abrupt in the best Clampett tradition. One moment the family is absorbing the weight of their restored wealth, and the next the telephone is ringing with news that sets Granny on a war footing that has been waiting fully formed in her imagination for decades. The speed of the shift still delights me. It is as though the series itself has grown restless with moral complexity and has decided to restore the household to its most elemental comic register, pure, unfiltered, magnificent overreaction. The call from Cousin Pearl is the spark. The line goes dead at a dramatic moment, and in that silence Granny hears everything her history has taught her to fear. They got Cousin Pearl, it was her who telephoned, said the Indians was trying to grab our land, and all of a sudden everything went dead. You got cut off, yeah, right in her scalp. The leap from a dropped connection to an active scalping is so extravagant, so completely Granny, that I laugh every time, and every time the laugh is followed by a rush of affection for the sheer consistency of her character. Irene Ryan plays the conviction with absolute seriousness. There is no wink at the audience, no softening of the panic. In Granny's mind, the Crow feet have been lying in wait for 100 years, and the only reason they have not struck until now is that the Clampetts had temporarily left the field. The return of the family to financial solidity has, in her cosmology, simply reminded the old enemy that the land is once again worth taking. Jed's resistance to the theory is played by Buddy Ebsen with the weary patience of a man who has spent a lifetime trying to talk the women in his family down from various ledges. He does not believe there is any engine trouble. He wants to call Pearl back and get the facts. The phrase engine trouble itself becomes one of those accidental comic perfect storms that the series specialized in. Granny's mishearing or mistranslating of Indians into engines is never explicitly explained. Yet it feels completely true to the way language moves inside that household, half understood, fully felt, and immediately converted into action. I have always loved the show for trusting the audience to track these linguistic skids without heavy underlining. The confusion is the joke, and the joke is allowed to breathe. While the family argues over the proper response to the imagined uprising, the actual crisis is taking shape in Mr. Drysdale's office, and the contrast between the two rooms is pure Beverly Hillbillies architecture. On one side of town, Granny is preparing for tomahawks and war ponies. On the other, Drysdale is learning that a neighboring Indian reservation has brought in a gusher on land that may or may not belong to the Clampett oil fields. The boundary dispute is real. The threat to the fortune is real. And Drysdale's reaction is the purest distillation of his character. The Indians are no longer a people with a legal claim. They are dirty, thieving savages who must be met with the full force of the cavalry and their thundersticks. Raymond Bailey plays the escalation with the sweaty intensity of a man who has already lost the Clampett millions once in a single day and cannot survive a second loss. His demand that the pony soldiers be sent in is both appalling and completely consistent. Money has always been the only language in which he is fluent. When the money is threatened, every other consideration, history, law, basic human dignity, drops away. The show's handling of the Indian characters themselves is of course a product of its time, and I cannot pretend that the stereotypes do not sit uneasily with a contemporary viewer. Yet even inside those limitations, the writers find room for a sophistication that complicates the expected joke. When Chief Running Wolf and his son Little Fox finally appear, they are not the war-painted raiders of Granny's imagination. They are educated, articulate, and quietly amused by the pale-face panic they have inadvertently caused. The chief is an Oxford man. The son holds a doctorate from Harvard. Their presence turns the entire structure of the misunderstanding inside out. The savages are the cosmopolitans. The civilized banker is the one calling for violence. The mountain family is the one loading rifles against an enemy that does not exist in the form they imagine. The inversion is sharp enough to draw blood, and the series, to its credit, does not sand down the edge. What moves me most in this opening movement of the Indian story is the way Granny's panic is treated as both ridiculous and deeply rooted. She is wrong about the facts. She is not wrong about the history of dispossession that makes the facts feel to her immediately plausible. The show never lectures us about that history. It simply lets an old woman who has carried the stories of her grandfathers respond to a land dispute with the full arsenal of those stories. The result is comedy, yes, but comedy that carries an undercurrent of unresolved American grief. I have never been able to laugh at Granny's war preparations without also feeling the weight of the longer narrative she is acting out. Jed's position between the two realities, Granny's imagined massacre and Drysdale's financial emergency, is the quiet moral center of the sequence. He does not believe the scalping story. He also does not share Drysdale's hunger for a military solution. His instinct is to talk to Meat to find out what the claim actually is before anyone starts shooting, in a story filled with people who are already certain they know the nature of the enemy. Jed's willingness to remain uncertain feels like a form of courage. Buddy Ebsen plays that willingness with the same understated authority he has always brought to Jed's best moments. He is not a pacifist in any theoretical sense. He is simply a man who prefers to look at the person across from him before deciding what the person is worth. As the family begins to gather weapons and Granny starts issuing orders for the defense of the mansion, I feel the familiar mixture of delight and ache that these later episodes so often produce in me. The Clampetts are once again preparing to meet the world with the full force of their unfiltered selves. The world, as usual, is more complicated than their preparation assumes, and in the gap between the assumption and the complexity, the series finds its most enduring comic and human territory. The Indians are coming. That much is true. Everything else, the war ponies, the flaming arrows, the certain scalping of Cousin Pearl, exists only in the vivid, unconquerable theater of Granny's mind. Watching her assemble that theater for one more performance remains for me one of the purest pleasures the show still offers. The boundary dispute will be settled as such things are by lawyers and surveyors and men who speak the language of deeds rather than tomahawks. But for this suspended moment before the educated chief arrives and the rifles are reluctantly set aside, the Clampett household is allowed to live inside a simpler story, the story in which the land is threatened, the family is ready, and an old woman who has never surrendered her sense of the frontier is once more permitted to stand guard. I love her for the readiness. I love the show for letting her have it, even as it prepares to reveal how thoroughly the readiness has misread the room. In that double vision affection for the panic clarity about its era, the series once again demonstrates the rare balance that has kept me returning to it for a lifetime.